Welcome into episode 133 of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. I'm Ken Ray.
And I'm Augustrometer.
More enterprise certificate abuse, threats to put CEOs into pokey, and a layer of certification for Mac apps. Glad to have you along on this edition of The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac.
Incredible.
News of a spyware app for iOS that's going to be hard for a lot of people to get. But if they do get it, boy have they been had. TechCrunch tells of the app, originally designed for Android, but since found to have targeted iPhone. Disguised to look like a carrier assistance app, the piece says once installed, it can silently grab a victim's contacts, audio recordings, photos, videos, and other device information, including their real-time location data. It can be remotely triggered to listen in on people's conversations, the researchers found as well. Now, it was found by a security firm called Lookout, and the researchers say they don't know who exactly was targeted, though the app was served from fake sites purporting to be cell carriers in Italy and Turkmenistan. That's one reason a lot of people hearing this won't be getting this. Most people listening to this probably don't listen from Italy or Turkmenistan. If you do, though, hey, how's it going? Here's the thing, people there do need to watch out. According to the report, researchers linked the app to the makers of a previously discovered Android app developed by the same Italian surveillance app maker, Connexa, known to be in use by Italian authorities. Now, the other reason most people won't get this software, it's not as easy as simply downloading an app from the App Store. At least it's not for iOS. You've heard this before, but, well, here we are having to do it again. According to TechCrunch, although the Android version was downloadable directly from Google's App Store, the iOS version was not widely distributed. Instead, Connexa signed the app with an enterprise certificate issued to the developer by Apple, allowing the surveillance app maker to bypass Apple's strict App Store checks. That is, of course, a violation of Apple's rules, same as it was when Facebook and Google did it, and when porn peddlers and people who run illegal gambling did it. Seriously, unless it's being used by a developer for developer stuff or businesses for internal business stuff, this is against Apple's rules. Now, can we please go over the legitimate reasons that people listening, because, I mean, there are real reasons that people might. Can we go over the reasons that people might need to install a profile that would bypass Apple's App Store?
Sure. If you're a developer, you're probably doing this as just a kind of matter of business, course of business kind of thing. But mostly it's used for quality assurance or beta testing, where you hand out an app to your friends along with a profile so they can run it and tell you what's wrong, what's working, what's not, that kind of thing. But those are both developer-oriented sort of tasks and reasons. If you're just the average iPhone user, the only real reason I can think of is if you've got a corporate device, an iPhone handed to you by your company, or you're running software on that device from that corporation, some sort of app that they want you to be able to run. That will come with its own profile versus being distributed in the App Store. There's probably other legitimate reasons, but those really are the big three. Anything else is so kind of like out there and on the edge that so few people are doing it that it's not even worth talking about.
Now, I'm curious where you would put installations like these. I mean, assuming it's not one of the legit ones that you just talked about. Curious where you'd put installation like these in relation to jailbreaking. I mean, to my way of thinking, jailbreaking leaves you vulnerable, but being walked through installing a profile like this basically means you have been targeted. So, like, jailbreaking would be, I might get hit by something. Being walked through a profile like this is somebody has taken aim. I mean, does that sound right to you?
A little bit. Jailbreaking is sort of like leaving your front door unlocked, where any app you install can pretty much do anything it wants to. And that's the kind of thing that you really want to avoid. That's why I don't jailbreak at all. If you're doing a profile installation, that's sort of like somebody knocking on your door and you deciding whether or not to let them in. So just be diligent and pay attention. Don't blindly click on the OK box just because you want to move on to the next stage of whatever it is you're trying to do. Read what it says. If it smells fishy, it probably is fishy. And don't install those things. It's just going to cause trouble for you.
Now, while people listening to this aren't likely to have fallen victim to this particular spyware, remind people, please, how to figure out whether they have, profiles that either they're not aware of, that they've forgotten about, or, probably most importantly, whether they have profiles that, that shouldn't be on their phone, on their iOS device.
Sure. iOS is pretty transparent about all of the profiles that you have installed. They make it really easy for you to see and to delete those things so that you can make sure that if you do have something on there that you don't want, you can get rid of it. The easiest way to do this is open your setting app, go to General, and then Profiles. If you don't have anything listed there, you're all good.
And if you do have something listed there, what should you do?
Review them all and make sure that you actually want them on your phone. You want the apps associated with them on your phone. You can tap on each one of them and it will give you more details, who installed it, where it came from, all that good stuff. And if you see something on there that you don't like, don't trust, or don't recognize, Apple makes it super easy. Just remove the profile. There's a button right there. You tap it and it's gone. And once you do that, not only is the profile gone, but the app can't do the things that the app wants to do that it shouldn't be doing to start with.
As for how many people were victim of this particular spyware, we don't know. Lookout doesn't know how many Apple users fell prey to the Connexa con. Neither Lookout nor Apple offered comment for the TechCrunch piece. Equifax loses the personal information of millions of people, and they're sorry. Facebook loses the personal info of millions of people, and they're sorry. Do you suppose they would take things like that more seriously and perhaps avoid the need to apologize if there was a chance that the CEOs of Equifax and Facebook and Earl Enterprises and Marriott and countless other data breaches we've discussed over the 2.5 years of doing this show...
Dunkin' Donuts,
that's another one. Would they be more careful with our data if the CEOs and upper execs of those companies face jail time for losing our data? Apple Insider has word of a bill introduced in the U.S. Senate that would make it easier to bring criminal charges against corporate executives for the way they handle data breaches and privacy. According to the piece, the Corporate Executive Accountability Act would establish criminal liability for negligent executive officers of major corporations, and for other purposes, according to the initial wording, only businesses with over $1 billion in annual revenue would be subject, and it would also be limited to violations affecting 1% or more of a state or the nation. So this isn't a local dry cleaner getting hacked and, they're on the hook. These are restaurant chains, hotel chains, social networks, companies like that. At the same time, what's funny is I tried to find a brand name that was big enough that most people would know it, but small enough that it would be under that $1 billion annual revenue cap, and I couldn't find one. Dave & Buster's, Baskin Robbins, even my teeny tiny regional bank makes more than $1 billion in revenue and affects, more people. I'm curious where you are on this idea, because I thought you and I had talked about it a while ago, and it seemed like you weren't a big fan, but now I can't remember. Where are you on this idea?
So I think when we talked before, it was sort of more of a mandatory, you lose the data, you go to jail kind of thing. And I'm against that because I understand that in some cases, those events happen and it's a mistake or an accident, it's not because you were negligent. It's not because you were trying to do something nefarious. So that's sort of where I fall on that. I think kind of our big problem is, you talked about Facebook apologizes every time they lose like 1 billion accounts worth of data. Mm-hmm. But to most people, they don't understand that. And if you went to your father and said, "Sorry, Dad, I lost the car," he'd go nuts because you lost a car. Physical items seem to be more important to people than bits and bytes. And I think that's just sort of where we are as a society. And we need to understand how important those bits and bytes really are. So I like the idea of legislation here. I really don't think it's going to go anywhere. But I do think it's a path forward, and it starts a conversation, and it's starting people on the idea that data is important. It's important that we show negligence of these CEOs because, like I said, mistakes do happen. They're unavoidable and they are understandable. But when you look at certain companies, Facebook, that just do things over and over and over and over again, that's not negligence. Those aren't mistakes. That's habits.
Well, even if they are mistakes, I mean, look, you shoot a guy accidentally, and that's terrible, and that's awful. And I don't know what the ramifications are at that point, but it's not necessarily criminal. You shoot 5 guys accidentally over the course of 6 months.
You pull a Dick Cheney and you get away with it. But you pull a Dick Cheney 5 times and you go, maybe you shouldn't have the shotgun anymore.
Right. It's important to show negligence. It can't just be there are serious breaches. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but there are serious breaches that happen one time, and that one time, I guess most breaches, you got to figure people are actually learning. We mentioned Marriott a moment ago. I mean, Marriott it ended up that it wasn't really Marriott. It was some company that Marriott had actually purchased, but now it's under the Marriott brand, and they've actually gone ahead and eliminated whatever that was because it was another company that they'd bought. Is Marriott going to be on the hook for the rest of all time, or is the CEO of Marriott going to be on the hook for something that happened, in this organization that they bought without knowing that was happening in that organization? The answer is no, I think. Facebook, on the other hand,
it's so easy to bash on them. It really is, and I hate it
because they keep doing it. I mean, we actually had a show planned that I think was 2 bad Facebook stories and this story. But how many times can you do the Facebook show? Because you could do a whole podcast. I feel certain you could do a whole weekly podcast just on the things that are wrong with Facebook. But who wants to listen to that? Anybody who wants to listen to that already knows that Facebook is dangerous, already has a bad idea about Facebook. I mean, we should probably just, the 4th story every week, because we only do 3. The 4th story every week should probably be, oh yeah, and Facebook. Am I right? Anyway, this piece does go on to say, executives could face a fine and or a prison sentence up to a year for their first offense, any prison time scaling up to 3 years for subsequent crimes. Now, here comes the predictable news. As August said a moment ago, this legislation is likely to go nowhere. I said it was introduced in the Senate. To clarify, it was introduced in a Republican-controlled Senate, not only by a Democratic senator, but a Democratic senator who's running for the Democratic presidential nomination. That would be Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts. The piece says the senator has made tackling corporate monopolies, corruption, and wealth inequality a centerpiece of her early campaign, though I think that's kind of unfair. That's actually been like a linchpin of her relatively short political career, and it's been part of her academic career before that. The thing is, though, she has to know in 2019 that this is going nowhere. Is it worth doing anyway? Is it worth doing anyway because of the value of the conversation? Because it does raise awareness?
I think awareness is super important. I do agree that, this is all politically motivated, and it isn't going to go anywhere at all. But it's important to at least put it out there and plant, some sort of flag in the ground and go, well, we tried. That said, I think eventually we do need to come up with very strong penalties for these multi-billion-dollar companies. I mean, you slap them with a $10 million fine and they're like, well, I made that in the time it took me to sign this document. Whereas if you are threatening somebody with jail time, they go, whoa, wait a minute. Maybe we need to rethink this. And that's, I think, where we need to be, is where the penalty is strong enough to make these corporations stop and think about what they're doing.
We talk over the stories on this show with the guys from SecureMac, with Nicholas Raba and Nicholas Todchek. Mr. Todchek tossed in an interesting comment. He also thinks this is going nowhere, at least not this year. At least now it'll be on the record and some discussion will take place, is what he says. That'll be a good starting point for future legislation and might actually, have a chance of being passed. I like that idea, but at the very least, yes, we do have it written down now that if 5 years down the road, somebody's like, well, why didn't anybody do anything? Then somebody can go, well, like you said, we tried, and here's where that was. Here's the thing. This stuff is going to keep happening. For me personally, I like the idea that Mark Zuckerberg might actually lose a little bit of sleep. But if Facebook leaves my login info open for the world to see, and somebody uses that info to access my bank account because I reuse simple passwords, as much as I want to make Zuckerberg the villain for leaving my information open, that's partly on Facebook. It's partly on me. I mean, there are still things that we can all do in the face of all this. I mean, I worry that this idea, while having merit, right, in the estimation of a lot of people, myself included, I worry that this idea just shifts the blame onto others and, relieves us of responsibility.
I totally understand where you're coming from, and I don't disagree. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for our own security. Even with legislation, threats of fines, jail time, nothing is going to protect you better than you. It's illegal to steal, but people get robbed every day. So, this is sort of my public service announcement. Use best practices. Always use strong passwords. Never reuse passwords across sites. If you have trouble managing all that, a password manager is a great tool to help you take care of all that. There are several out there that are very reputable. Enable two-step verification if you can. If you can't, if your service doesn't have that, bug the crap out of them until they do, because that is super important. And then a couple of best practices that they don't really apply here, but they're still really, really good ideas. Keep all your software up to date and use a malware scanner. Those things just help you so much in terms of being able to sleep at night.
A new layer of certification for apps for the Mac. Well, not a new layer, but a renewed push towards that layer. Now, we'll talk more about that in a moment, but first a word about MacScan 3 from SecureMac. People used to think that Macs were immune to malware. While that's never been true, it's less true today than ever before. More and more people are using Macs, doing more shopping, storing more information, giving more bad guys more reasons to try to hack in. The number of malicious files for Macs has increased exponentially over the last decade. Staying ahead of the bad guys is important, and MacScan 3 can help. MacScan 3 is a great defense against malicious software attacks aimed at your Mac. It detects and removes Mac malware, catches keyloggers, removes tracking cookies, and provides full range or targeted scanning, all without crowding up your hard drive or slowing down your machine. Say goodbye to worry with MacScan 3 from SecureMac. Sign up for a free 30-day trial today at securemac.com/MacScan. That's MacScan 3 by SecureMac. Your 30-day free trial is waiting at securemac.com/MacScan. As good a job as Apple does safeguarding its app stores, there are always ways to improve. The company seems to be trying one now, though personally I need a bit of clarification. We go back to Apple Insider, which has news of increased notarization. According to the report, all new apps developed using a fresh developer ID must be notarized to pass through Gatekeeper from macOS 10.14.5 onwards, Apple has advised, with the extra security process requirement landing ahead of an expansion to all macOS software in a future update. Introduced at WWDC 2018, a piece from close to a year ago says, for apps that are distributed outside the Mac App Store, Apple introduced the option for developers to notarize their apps, an extension to Apple's existing developer ID program for verifying the creators of apps. Developers can submit their apps to Apple for review, with notarized apps confirmed by the company to be free of malware and other hazards. As well as providing an extra layer of protection to users, the piece continues, notarizing apps will also make it easier to revoke specific compromised versions of apps compared to the existing signing certificate system, which can revoke all apps using the same certificate. So last year this was an option. This year it's mandatory for new developer IDs. Is that correct?
I believe it will be as of OS 10.14.5, which is in beta right now. In the future, Apple promises this will be required by default for all software.
Okay, here's what I don't understand. Apple Insider says this process is just for apps distributed separately from the Mac App Store, which undergoes more rigorous checks before being made available. Why do I, as a developer, want to do this if I'm not selling through the Mac App Store?
So let me sort of break down my understanding of the review process. Mm-hmm. First of all, there's an automated review process where they've spent a lot of time writing software to check software. And it looks for things like, using APIs that you're not supposed to be using, calls to certain servers that you shouldn't be doing, sending of information that you shouldn't be sending, that kind of thing. Once it passes that, it's handed off to a human who then goes through every step along the way. And there are additional checks that both the human does, and then there's some software attached to that as well. What this does is basically just use the first part of that where it runs it through the automated process to make sure that it's not really doing anything that it shouldn't do. Some app developers use techniques that would never be allowed on the App Store. If, for example, it accesses low-level file system stuff or maybe low-level audio system stuff, it won't be on the App Store because the App Store rules just don't allow it. Other developers simply don't want to sell their stuff there. And, that's a fair choice. There's nothing wrong with that. This, however, gives them an additional level of trust. So in theory, they can sell more software. It kind of feels like to me this is a reaction to some of the shady things we've seen organizations do, and we've already talked about on the show. It should help prevent installation of malware and hopefully keep all of us just a little bit safer. That said, I also kind of feel like it's Apple expanding the walls of its walled garden. And I'm not sure everyone, including legit developers, are going to be happy about that.
Yeah, this is the part that kind of confuses me. It sort of seems like, does that mean that there's going to be another pain point for people who don't want to play along? Like if there's an app that I use, I'm going to make one up. Let's say there's a plugin that I use for my audio stuff, or not a plugin, but a separate processor, let's say, that I use for my audio stuff. They don't want anything to do with Apple, but it is actually a legit company, and it is a processor that I want to use. It almost feels like what Apple's eventually going to do is maybe make it so difficult for me to install that I'll be like, either I'll be like nuts to this, I don't want to do it anymore, Or I'll write to that processor and say, seriously, you should pay Apple whatever it is that Apple wants you to pay them so that you can get whatever, gold star that they want to put on your app so that I can install it pain-free.
Yeah, I do worry that that's the path that we're headed down. You look at cities that have loads of cameras. Mm-hmm. And those cameras are all over the place and ostensibly there for your own protection. And they sit there and they say, well, if somebody does something bad, we'll be able to track them as they get away from the bank vault or whatever they stole. And, on the surface you go, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. But then what if they decide that just leaving work early is a bad thing? Then they've got all these cameras that track you on your way home. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen with this, but it's the kind of thing that makes you stop and go, boy, it certainly does open a Pandora's box of possibilities that make you kind of cringe a little bit.
See, 3 years ago, I would have said that leap was far too great. And then 2.5 years ago, I started working on the checklist. Hey, if you're looking for more security news and how-tos, the place to look is SecureMac.com/checklist. You'll find notes for this show, for the last show, for all the shows we've done before, and any shows in the future. SecureMac.com/checklist. If you have a question you'd like to ask or a topic you would like to hear us hit, our email address is checklist@securemac.com. The address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, please do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by SecureMac. And we'll talk to you next week.